Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Nejla and I just completed my EPQ project this summer. I wanted to make this video to help anybody who might be struggling with it because I know I was, and I did an artifact, not an essay. And I know it can be quite difficult because it feels like there's not enough online or just generally about the EPQ, so I wanted to share some knowledge. So if you clicked on this video, I'm guessing you know at least the basics on the EPQ. It is a project and the exam board is AQA. EPQ stands for Extended Project Qualification, and if you didn't know, it only counts as half the UCAS points. So let's say you got an A star, you would get 28 points, UCAS points. When you're doing an EPQ, you can either choose to do an essay, or as they call it, a report, a 5,000 word report, or you can do an artifact, which is what I did. I did a documentary, which I'm going to put down below if you wanted to watch it. Now, that also needs to have an essay with it. So the EPQ is basically split into four parts. Managing, so that's like planning and stuff, that counts as 20% of your grade. Resource use, that's also 20%, so like that's all the information that you looked up, all your research and how you use it. And then the biggest part is developing and realizing, that is 40%, and that's your actual project. So in my case, the 40% would have been the documentary and the sketchbook that I did. I would show it to you, but it's currently being moderated, so I don't have it on me. And then the final 20% will be review, and that will be your 10 to 15 minute presentation, because you'll need to do a presentation to your supervisor and maybe to even teachers or students explaining your project. So when you're doing your EPQ project, there's four main parts that you will need to worry about. So the first part is the biggest part. Like I said, it will count for 40% of your grade. That will be your actual artifact. I'm focusing mainly on artifact because that's what I did. So you will have your actual artifact, your actual project, and that can be anything. That can be a piece of art, that can be a painting, a sculpture, it can be a comic book, it can even be you built something or just research. But in my case, I made a documentary, so it's not like an essay. And then you will need to accompany it with another essay, which will be between 1,000 to 5,000 words, in which you review everything that you've done, what you would have done differently. I will go into a bit more depth about that. You will also have a logbook that will be provided on, it's a website by AQA called Project Q. You'll be given hopefully all your information from your supervisor and how to use it. And the last part you'll have to worry about is the one that they use to grade your review, which is 20%. That will be your presentation, which I will also go into depth about. I also filmed mine, so I'll show little snippets of that. So when it comes to doing the actual project, you have sort of creative liberty to do anything that you want, really, as long as it's doable, I guess. One thing that I will say is your initial plans will be quite rough, and they might not end up like what you actually do. So you might start out with a project and think, this is definitely not going how I wanted it to go or how I expected it to go. You obviously have 2 years to complete it, so I would say, like, don't worry too much about it, because like, for example, when I first started my documentary, I knew that I wanted to do a documentary, but I didn't know how I wanted it to turn out or what the topic was even about. So I spent like a month looking and searching what topics I could possibly do before I finally landed on the idea that I landed on and that I actually did. So yeah, it can be quite difficult and challenging, I think, to figure out what you want to do. So definitely don't worry about it. So you are advised to, once you figure out which topics you want to go into, because usually you'll have sort of similar topics, or you can either, by the way, you can do this as an individual or you can do it as a group. I did it as an individual. Once you've figured out some topics and some ideas, you should look for a working title. That's not going to be your final title. Like, I remember my first title had nothing to do with my final title. I couldn't figure out a title until I had actually done the interviews and everything. So don't be worried about that. But you will put all of that down in your logbook on the Project Q website. So now that I've sort of gone through what the project entails, like I said, it's really broad. You have the freedom to do anything you want, really. Like, it's not very specific. I think the most important parts of this project aren't actually your product, but showing that you can use data that's online or things that you can find. You can use research, you show good planning, all that stuff. Because the EPQ can be really important, obviously, to put down for your personal statement, but it's also really good in showing that you are passionate about a project. Like, personally, when I did the documentary, that's how I figured out that I wanted to go into journalism. So it was very important for me as a project. I think the EPQ is really important because it gives you that opportunity to showcase that you're very independent, or that you can do a project, or you are passionate about a subject or a topic. So I think that's what they're looking for, really. Okay, so now moving on to the logbook. This one is very important, and I cannot stress enough just how important it is. Honestly, I had to be reminded by my supervisor constantly to go and check it out and write things down. But the logbook is sort of like a diary. So I had a diary like this that I filled out with like pages, but I'll go through that later. But the logbook is different. The logbook will be asking you sort of a number of questions. It's a website from AQA, and you will basically be asked a bunch of questions to fill in. Things like, can you write down your working title, or what information have you looked up, and what information are you going to keep looking up? What's something you've done? What's something you're going to improve on? And it's going to ask you about conversation with your supervisor as well. And then there will also be a bit for your supervisor to fill in and give you advice on anything that you might need to fix. But I definitely do say, like, go check it out, go look at it. Don't just like ignore it and leave it out. Now that I've explained the artifact and the logbook, I wanted to talk about the parts where you plan and manage, which is where I will bring in my diary. So my diary had sort of like a schedule like this. This is very important, especially if you're doing something where you need to keep track of time. So let's say you're doing something that's like a science project, or you will need to keep track of the dates. This is really good, and having planners, but also you might need it to write things out, like you might need it for things like planning and writing down sort of initial ideas or things you're going to work on. I personally also used it when I was doing my translations for the documentary, but you can use it really for anything. Planning is also going to be really important because managing resources is part of the EPQ. That's also graded as 20%, and that can be the thing that differentiates your grade from like a B to an A, or an A to an A star. Planning is also a core part of the EPQ, and it's very important because it shows that you can use resources and manage resources. Learning to plan with the EPQ was also just crucial because I think it was very useful, a useful skill in the future generally if I want to go into journalism, or if you want to go into whatever you're doing. I think at the start of the EPQ I didn't really take it into account, like I didn't plan as much as I did, but by sort of halfway through the EPQ I realized, oh, I need to actually keep track of everything, really. Anything that you read, even if you don't end up using it, anything that you use or don't use, anything that you've read, anything that might have impacted your EPQ, even if you don't realize it, just write it down, plan it. It's really just good to keep track of everything. Now moving on to the part that I personally struggled a lot with, which was the report alongside the artifact, the one that accompanies the artifact. I personally struggled with it because I didn't know what I needed to write on. It tells you that you need about 1,000 to 5,000 words, but it doesn't really specify what you need to include in that essay. It doesn't specify if you need to talk about your project or if you need to talk about anything that you'd have done different. I personally just went for all of that. I took sort of, I basically wrote why I made the documentary, what I would have made, what I would have done differently, if I could go back, what I would do now that I've learned the skills, what skills I've learned, and if there's anything that I missed out on. And it's also like reviewing all of the resources that you found or didn't find and stuff like that. So here's my essay, and I split it into multiple parts. So I did an introduction, and then the context, because obviously I did a documentary that was not set in the UK, it was set in Algeria, so I just sort of gave a bit of context on like history of immigration in Algeria. I thought that was quite important. I would also advise you do that if you're doing a project that you think people might not be familiar with. Then I went into the discussion at the back, which was, I think, my longest part. Yeah, it was my longest part, where I talk about the questions that I asked on the documentary, where I go through all the questions that I asked in the documentary and what I learned from those questions, and what I think that says about my project. Then I went in with another discussion about the documentary and not the questions. So the reason why I use the documentary, the reason why I think using a documentary is a good tool for the project that I was doing, to answer the question that I was asking, because that's essentially what it is. When you're doing an EPQ, you're answering a question. And so I'd ask my question, and why do I think that doing it as a answering the question in documentary form was the best way to go about it. So when I did my documentary, I did a screening where I essentially brought in a bunch of teachers and students to watch my documentary and give me any feedback. So I had like a survey where they could answer questions on if they were familiar with the topic, if they learned anything, if they liked the editing, stuff like that, and then went back and fixed any issues that they might have had or things that I might have seen missed the first time and things like that. But in my essay, I also bring that up and I talk about the feedback that I received and what I did with that feedback. I think if you do something similar to that and you show people your project and you get any feedback, it'll be very good to just add it to the essay because that's something you've done. Like I said, you need to log anything that you've done down. So in the end of my essay, I did a conclusion and an evaluation. In my conclusion, I sort of talk about what I think people learned from my documentary and what I learned from the documentary, and then evaluation was the part where I said, this is what I did, this is where I would have done something differently. Obviously, you sort of talk about that throughout the essay. For example, with my documentary, I spoke about how I wish I'd done B-roll shots and shot from a few more angles, but then I would have gone in and said I only had access to one camera or one phone to do that with, so I didn't really have the opportunity to make that change. But in your evaluation, you sort of solidify that feeling, you solidify those opinions and ideas of like, I did this, I would have done it differently, I've learned this, and next time that I make a documentary or whatnot, this is what I would have done differently. That's all I can really say about the essay or the report, the 1,000 to 5,000 word report that you do alongside your artifact, because that's all I really did. It was, I think, the biggest struggle when it came to doing my EPQ. Like, I didn't know what to write, I didn't know what they wanted me to write. So I hope that this at least can help you figure out what you need to write for your essay, because I definitely needed that help. So the last part you really need to worry about with your EPQ is the 20% that counts for review, and that is done through the presentation that you'll do, the 10 to 15 minute presentation. Mine was about 12 minutes long, I think. So what it is you can do it however you want to. You can show your project, you can sort of freestyle and just talk about it. I did a presentation, so like a PowerPoint, and spoke through it. So I had like a little speech prepared to speak through it, and I had a couple teachers watching it plus my supervisor. I filmed mine, so I can definitely put a couple snippets in. Making short comedy videos and family edits. I was also able to download it at home and start working on the documentary. But essentially what I did is I go through it, I go through my initial ideas, what I did, like sort of my setup, I go through editing, things that like people wouldn't really be familiar with when it comes to making documentaries. Like, I spoke about the hard part of asking questions, the awkward part, how I figured out which questions I needed to ask, which questions I wanted to ask. And then the last part is they'll ask you questions, teachers or your supervisor, if it's just your supervisor, but in my case there were teachers watching, so they asked me a couple questions. Yeah, so I did all of my interviews in Algeria in December. And it was a tough time, and it's just really showing that you know your project and you know what you've done, and you're confident in what you've done. I would say the review part, like the presentation you've done, is very much similar to if you've ever done the English speaking in GCSE time, or even if you do language speaking, it's and in A levels and you do those presentations, it's very similar to that. You have a sort of PowerPoint and you show your project, and you explain it and you get asked questions about it. So that's about it. It's just showing that you're confident in it and that you've learned something from it, and it's just reviewing it. So that's all my knowledge on the EPQ. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have, please feel free to share it to anybody who is doing an EPQ, more specifically an Artefact, because I feel like it was definitely like difficult to find help online about it, or anybody who might know something about how to go about it. I mean, doing your project isn't the most difficult part in my opinion. Like, once I was done with the editing and I finally put my video up and uploaded it, I realized that I needed to take care of that essay and the logbook and all of that. It just felt so overwhelming, because I mean 60% of the project is just showing that you can plan and review and manage your resources, which is difficult to do if you've never done it before. But if you are struggling with the EPQ, I will say it is worth it, and you will learn so many new skills. And in my case, I even figured out that I wanted to go into journalism. If you are struggling with the EPQ, I hope this also helps you to find the motivation to go through with it. And if you've completed yours, and if you felt as if like your initial idea didn't match up the ending idea. Me too. I mean, when I first started, I had no idea what it was going into, but the final project is definitely not what I expected, but I was still proud of it. I mean, I was proud of it nonetheless, because I think when you're also doing the project, you'll judge yourself a lot more than if somebody watched it. Because whenever I would show people my documentaries and they'd be like, wow, this is great, I can't believe you've completed that, and I'll be like, oh, it could be better. But that's because you're the one who's doing it, and you're always going to want it to be perfect, really. So I would say don't worry too much about that, and good luck with your project. I've just completed mine, and hopefully I'll go into making more documentaries. But if this is something that you're passionate about, if what you're doing on your EPQ is something that you're passionate about, or even if you've not even started your EPQ and you're just thinking, should I do an EPQ? I would say yes. I would say it can be quite overwhelming, especially if you're doing 3+ A-level subject, 3 or more A-level subjects, so it can be a little bit difficult to complete all of those, but I would say it was completely worth it, and I would do it all over again. And now that I've learned those skills that I did, I think I could probably do it a lot better. But yeah, that's all the advice that I can give, and good luck with your projects.